There's nothing soft about soft skills. This is the IssuesWatch podcast. Hi, I'm Don Meyer, Chief Marketing Officer at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to the IssuesWatch podcast. CPAs are trained to be methodical, organized, and detail-oriented. But in survey after survey, employers state that soft skills are either as important or more important than hard skills. Whether a professional is looking for a new job or seeking a promotion, focusing on and developing soft skills can help employees be more well-rounded and employable professionals. But enhancing soft skills has not always been a part of proper career planning in the business world. Perhaps the problem is the term itself. Here with me to discuss how actively managing and monitoring these skills can yield dividends on your career investment is Thomas Metelski, a CPA and International Coaching Federation accredited coach and the founder of Jump Coaching and Consulting. Welcome, Thomas.
Don, how are you? It's a pleasure. I can't believe I'm actually here. It's been a 30-year journey to get here, and I'm super excited to be here.
Wow, a 30-year journey. We've never had a guest say that before. So, all right. Well, I'm glad you finally made it.
Well, you know, it is. I started my fun journey when I was an intern, and I interned at NJCPA, and that was about 30 years ago. And then when I graduated college, I started at what is now PwC, but back then it was Price Waterhouse. So it's been a while.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry it took so long. We'll have to have you back to make up for it.
Absolutely. You know, and the thing is, you know, being a coach, you want to set yourself up for goals. You want to set yourself up for success. So one of the things I was thinking as a goal is that I can beat Joe Tarasco's goal for having repeat, attendance on the podcast. So that's what I'm hoping for today.
Well, I'm seeing this as like a Saturday Night Live thing, you know, how they have that like special room and special recognition for, I think it's 5-time guests.
Yes, I get the jacket.
Yes, exactly. So you're one now. Joe is definitely 2. So I'll have to have you back pretty soon, just so you can catch up to him. So I like this idea. Yeah, I like this idea. All right, so let's get started. And let's start with the term soft skills. Read your article in the New Jersey CPA magazine where you talked a lot about soft skills. Let's dig into that. Why do you think soft skills is an outdated term, and what do you think these skill sets should be called instead?
Yeah, that's a great question. And like I said, you know, back on my journey 30 years ago, we were still using that term soft skills. And, you know, the profession and business has evolved significantly since then. I mean, back in those days, Don, I would have to take 2 green column spreadsheets and tape them together, paper ones, if I had to, you know, do more work across columns, if I had more than 12. Where today, now, you can do most of this on your phone. You can do a lot of auditing, you know, techniques through computers. You know, at PwC, one of my first laptops was almost like a suitcase, and I had to sign it out, and it took half the table, and it was a big red screen. So many things have evolved, but in terms of sort of your own personal development and things that have that real impact on who you are and what value you provide, that term just really isn't covering it today. You know, many things have happened, and those types of terms need to sort of fade out. And we really need to bring in other terms that are more indicative of the value that's being provided. So for me, I love the term enhanced people skills. And, you know, my fellow CPAs will love it because it's EPS. So it's something that we can all sort of gravitate to. So that from that perspective, that's what I like to hear being called for, you know, going forward.
Okay. So what specific skills make up enhanced people skills?
Great question. So when you look at EPS, we think of it almost as a portfolio, right? So there's a couple buckets. So we look at it from three pillars. There is a values-based framework, right? There's transformational skills, and there's transactional skills. So if you look at these 3 elements together, that's what we say really enhances people's skills. So from a values-based perspective, what's included in that? Well, we think it's foundational, because once you know thyself, you can really have an impact with others. So what does that include? Having an understanding of your core values, you know, your belief system in that regard, bring it to consciousness, which most people do not do. It also has to do with your ethical framework. How are you relating? How, you know, what are the things that are important to you from an ethics perspective? And if you look at transformational skills, we see that as something that's impacting and changing the ability to change not only yourself, but others. So things such as ethical leadership, right? There's servant leadership. There's a lot of different types of skills that are necessary to move yourself and others forwards from challenges. So that's transformational. From a transactional perspective, a lot of these things, are really, really coming to light now. And one specific one that has a whole group of there is emotional intelligence. So those are things such as empathy, interpersonal skills, stress tolerance. So there's a whole list of types of skills that are incorporated in EPS that we can really start to identify and almost pick and choose, so you can create your own inventory of skills that are applicable to what you want to achieve.
Okay. No, ideally, EPS would start to get developed in college or even high school, but often students graduate without knowing the first thing about any of these skills. So what should companies do to help employees, and what can employees themselves do to improve their people skills on their own?
Don, thank you so much for bringing that to light, because you're right. Historically, these things have not been part of education in terms of high school and college. But here's the great thing, and here's what's really, really pushing not just higher ed, but what's going to push us in an industry further. So right now, there are institutions that really understand the value of EPS and are pushing it from a higher ed perspective. And these are very progressive programs. So an example I utilized in the article was Rice University. And there is an amazing book called Leadership Reckoning, which really highlights the fact that a lot of universities are almost doing us a disservice in terms of our professionals, in terms of leadership. And they do a tremendous amount of research, and there's a lot of data that's evolved there, because without the data, it's just an opinion, right? And when we're issuing opinions, we want to make sure we have the data. So higher ed is actually starting to shift, and we will see that over time. So what can companies do? Companies can do a lot of things, and especially now in terms of what's happening in this space. We've heard the Great Resignation. Joe touched on that on the podcast that you guys did the other day. So, it's amazing what companies can do. So right now, a lot of times we have exit interviews, right, with companies. People are leaving like crazy. But the interesting thing that a company can do, and some are starting to do, is they're actually having stay interviews. So what is it that your key employees and those that you really want to retain, what are they curious about? What are they interested in? What do they want to explore? And you're seeing a lot of firms do that now. There was actually, I think it was a podcast I was listening to where KPMG in Australia is putting a lot of these stay interviews in place. And what they're also talking about is the partners really have to take action on those things that their associates really are important, really want to gravitate to. So that's one of the things that corporations can do. Individuals, it's really about awareness, and that's one of the things I can talk about later. But it's awareness of where are those skills that you think are going to be able to advance your career. Now we have much more power over our career paths and where we want to go. Which is maybe not always as typical, 20, 30 years ago. I remember when I started, I had a mentor at PwC, and he says, if you don't take control of your career, somebody else will. So what can people do now? They can look at those who they aspire to be. What professions do they want to be? What are the skills that these individuals have? And how can I start to emulate those things to get to the success that I want to be?
Okay, great. Now, one of the knocks on people skills or soft skills, if we want to use an old term, is that they can't be measured. The thought is that you have to see them in action. In other words, you know it when you see it. But you disagree. So tell us about the formula you developed to measure people skills.
Yeah, so I do disagree with that. And you know what? Maybe early in my career that could have been possible because not a lot of people were looking at EPS, right? So, but the interesting thing now is that there's so much research going on in this area. So, for example, there's a Dr. Bradbury who was at UCA Davis, and he's a leading researcher in emotional intelligence. And one of the studies that he published, he found that leaders of organizations, overwhelmingly 90% of the leaders that he studied were very, very high in emotional intelligence. So, and he draws the corollary that the higher you go, the more you have to incorporate EPS type skills. And we know this as we progress in our career. When you start as a staff accountant, you're really doing a lot of the reconciliation, you're doing a lot of the tracing, the vouching, a lot of the detail work. But when you progress up towards the partner level, you're doing less of that. So your technical skills, you technically go down slightly, but your EPS skills really increase because now you're leading people, you're motivating people, you're working with clients and things of that nature. So those things are very important now. And with that, the measurement's important because you get what you measure. So what I say to do for people, if they're just starting this EPS journey, take a look at a typical work week that you may have and just jot down the number of hours that you typically work with others, whether it's in meetings, conversations, or with your teams, or if you're presenting. Take a look at those hours and simply, do a ratio of those hours compared to your 40-hour work week. If you're spending over half your time or 50% of your hours working with others, you really have to assess where you are on that EPS spectrum. What skills do you need to really develop? So that's a quick ratio that you can do to understand where you are in your journey. If you're sort of curious, should I invest in myself and more, or what skills do I need? Think about the time that you're investing with others, and that'll give you a real clear indication where you should go.
I want to talk about, everybody loves lists. And I know in the spring issue of New Jersey CPA magazine, you wrote there are 5 A's that will help CPAs to build their enhanced people skills, or EPS, and manage their career. So tell us about the 5 A's.
Yeah, the 5 A's was pretty interesting. And I actually came up with that when I was listening to, there's a coach that Michael Jordan had in terms of meditation. And you can Google this, it's there. And he spoke on a podcast with Tim Ferriss, and he mentioned his A's. And I said, well, how is that applicable to some of the things that I've seen in industry and some of the things that people are struggling with? And how could an easy acronym sort of help them out? So the 5 A's that I came up with, the first one I already mentioned earlier, it's awareness. When you have a key awareness of where your gaps are, or where your deficiencies are, that's critical. That's the first step. It's foundational. It has to happen. Nothing can happen without that awareness. And once you have that, you can really sort of unleash what you want to do. And then I also mentioned data. So it's important to get some data around that. So once you have awareness, then do some assessments. Understand where you are. And there's plenty that are out there, especially in categories of EPS. So for example, emotional intelligence is one of them that's out there. There's energy leadership indexes that are out there. So there's a lot of ways that you can assess where your skill level is and where you can determine where you want to go. And then after that, you want to do a little bit of analysis on that assessment. And based on that, you can say, what is the path that I really need to go in order to achieve my goals? And from there, you want to say, what are the action plans that are associated with that I can move forward? And then from that action plan, it has to do with, accountability. So once you take accountability for your actions, that's really going to drive you towards success and actually make you get there. So those are the 5 A's.
Now, a couple of things you said earlier on in the interview that I'm going to come back to. Excuse me. One of them is, you started your career in public accounting.
Yes.
And public accounting, the billable hour is a big thing. And when you were talking about your formula, you were talking about like the amount of time that you might spend interacting with other people, communicating with other people. Now, of course, that's not necessarily, if it's internal, that's not necessarily billable time. So do you think one of the obstacles to someone in public accounting developing their EPS is the fact that it's not billable? It's not accountable, if you will.
You are 1,000% correct. It doesn't show up in the billable statements, but what it will show up in is the quality of your people. So what is all of our, all the firms that, that I've worked with and I've talked with, what is the product? The product is their people. The asset is their people, right? When you go to firms, they talk about the excellence and the professionalism of their people. And they do that through continuing education, right? And we also go, we go to the best schools that we can provide, we can recruit people from. So it's really about the investment in your people. And we understand, listen, what they used to call hard skills, that is found, there's no doubt that's, entry point. You need that. But what has to happen is that it has to be matched with these EPS skills in order for people to really bring maximum value to your clients and to those that you're serving. So from my perspective, yes, it may not show up when you're sending out your bills to your clients, but it's going to show up in the quality of your people, the people that you're retaining, and the people that you're developing. And that ultimately flushes through your billings.
And I would imagine that EPS skills are even, or EPS is even more important now that more and more firms are gravitating towards advisory services, because that's really more about the individual than it is about a technical skill set that you might see on the audit side or the tax side. It's really about relationships and knowledge and being able to communicate that.
Yeah, you 1,000% right. So some of my friends that I've started with, I've gone on to be partners, and a couple of them are on the consulting side. And when we get together and we talk, it really is more about the relationship and understanding the client and what they're trying to achieve. Because here's the fact, they have all the technical skills and all the technical people that they need in order to achieve what's happening. But if they can't really connect with that client or that leadership team, because there's a trust that has to be happening, right? Once that connection and that trust is there, that's what's important. And that's what EPS is really helps people associate and understand, is how do we build those skills that we can go into and have conversations and build trust and build sort of that excitement about what we're doing. Because when you get to that level, you really have the resources at your disposal from a technical perspective. At that point, it's really about the relationships. Do you really gel? Are you really meshing? Is it really something that we can work together for? Because we're going to be working together a lot, and we're entering to a longer term relationship. Is this something that we can achieve together?
Right. Just coincidentally, a couple of days ago, I saw an ad campaign from a large regional firm, won't mention the name, but they are doing an entire campaign about being the people who provide answers. And there were 4 ads, I think, included in the campaign. And really none of them mention the fact that the advertisements are for an accounting firm until they get to the very end where they say accounting and advisory. But up to that point, you would have no idea that they were talking about an accounting firm. So they're really playing up the fact that we can solve your problems, we can provide you with answers. And I think that goes back to EPS.
Without a doubt. And there's many avenues to take this, right? So again, it's that interpersonal relationship that you're having, but it's also what they're meshing there is their technical prowess, along with the fact that they have the expertise in order to understand culture and values and what the organizations are trying to achieve. So that's another strong element about EPS, is having, I mentioned the values framework. Well, that also, built into that is the understanding of culture, right? And what that really means. So when these firms are putting that out there, what they're really saying is, obviously we have the technical expertise. That's sort of a given. But what we have that others may not have is the ability to understand your culture and to understand what's the best ways for you to maximize what you're trying to achieve. So I absolutely agree, Don.
Right. And one last question, and it's about another acronym, DE&I. So
Yes.
diversity, equity, inclusion, obviously it's something that all companies have been paying attention to for a couple of years now, hopefully even longer than that. How do you work in diversity, equity, inclusion into EPS, or how do you kind of like meld those two things together so they're not developed in parallel tracks, they're actually being developed simultaneously?
That's an absolutely amazing question. So one of the things that I'm proud of is I serve on the board of the International Coaching Federation in New Jersey. So I'm a board member there, and I'm also a part of the DE&I committee of the chapter. And these are conversations that we have a lot. And our chairperson is amazing and has done a lot of work in DE&I for many, many years. And the philosophy that I embraced from her, hi Willa, if you ever see this, Willa, is DEI is not a program. It is not something that we check mark. It is not a webinar. It is not a pamphlet. DE&I has to be woven into the fabric of everything that we do. So from an EPS perspective, it's really about, again, it just goes to that values framework. How are we including everybody in terms of what the framework and what values are important to people? How are these things transferring from a leadership perspective? How are the skills that we are trying to talk about being embraced in areas where they may not be embraced? So it is something that we don't specifically identify. We try to weave in the entire understanding of DEI.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a great answer, because I think very often we think of DE&I and other really important initiatives for the profession. We silo them, and we think about, well, I'll deal with this today, and the next thing on Tuesday, and next thing on Wednesday. But really, they're all interrelated. They have to be, otherwise they're always going to sort of be on the outside looking in.
Exactly. So you want to be part of the consciousness. So I think DE&I is an incredibly important initiative right now, because the consciousness is not there.
Right.
When we're developing programs or we're talking about these things, DE&I, may be in the background. But I think if the philosophy is weaving it into everyday operations and everything that we do, then it becomes much more impactful. And that's what we want to achieve in terms of equality and diversity and inclusion. So these are things that are important. It's not a separate program. It should be really baked into everything that we do. So for example, some of we do some pro bono coaching at the ICF Federation, and from New Jersey. So we have coaches that will go out and service organizations that help others in need. And what we try to do is actually bring in and talk to other DEI coaches about what are some of the things and the challenges that we may not be thinking about as coaches as we explore this world. So we try to bake it into our process, not make it separate. We try to include it so it's aggregated and it's part of every single discussion and topic that we talk about, not something that's separate that we layer in.
Right. Well, I think that's a great spot to leave off. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today. As a communications person myself, I always love conversations about EPS, enhanced people skills, communication skills. So this was very insightful for me as well, and hopefully for all of our listeners and our watchers.
Don, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Hopefully you guys will have me back again. I'm looking forward to getting that jacket and then providing value to the membership. That's what it's all about.
All right, we'll start looking at the calendar right now.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you. Thanks for listening and watching. To learn more about the services that Thomas and the team at Jump Coaching and Consulting offer, visit jumpcc.com. And read Thomas's article in the spring issue of New Jersey CPA magazine at njcpa.org/New Jersey CPA.